tab on your screen to raise your hand during the question and comment period. You can see it outlined in red. Jennifer Norwood, our Director of External Affairs and Partnerships and tonight's Zoom moderator, will unmute you and invite you to speak. But please note that you might also have to unmute yourself before you start talking. We'll see how many people are talking while muted. Please also note that we'll be recording tonight's meeting, which is a wonderful thing. We do always post the PowerPoints, and it would be great if we can start posting the actual meetings. Next slide. So on behalf of the Baker administration, Governor Baker, Lieutenant Governor Polito, Secretary Theoharides, and Commissioner Montgomery, welcome. Here tonight representing DCR are Danielle Mellett, Design and Project Management Landscape Architect, who is managing the project with me. Jeff Parenti, Deputy Chief of Transportation Infrastructure and Construction. Dan Driscoll, Director of Green Transportation. Craig Cashman, Director of Legislative Affairs. Ann Fessinger, Director of Public Outreach. And as I mentioned, Jenny Norwood, Director of External Affairs and Partnerships, is this evening's moderator. There are many others. We have a deep bench in transportation, resource protection, operations, who all lend their technical expertise behind the scenes. Our project team also includes your legislators. Registered tonight is Rep. Khan, Senator Cream, and Representative Balzer. If I've missed anyone, please raise your hand and we can recognize you. Thank you all for attending and thank you for your support. We'll give the legislators an opportunity to comment at the beginning of the listening session, unless anybody'd like to start the meeting. Do we have any hands raised, Jenny? Okay. So we'll hope to hear from people in a little bit. We may have Mass DOT and Newton and Wellesley officials attending. We have been coordinating closely with both Mass DOT and the municipalities, and we're very grateful for their time and insights. So thanks to all of you, officials, residents, volunteers, advocates. We are so glad you are here. Next slide. Next slide, Jenny. There it is. DCR's mission is to protect, promote, and enhance our commonwealth of natural, cultural, and recreational resources. During this COVID-19 season, our mission has never felt more important. And at Lower Falls, like all of our unique places, we will balance preservation, resource protection, and public access. Next slide. The purpose of this evening's meeting is really to listen to you. We are going to introduce the project team, present a site analysis, as well as the proposed trail alignment. We've worked hard to understand the site, past planning studies, stakeholder and municipal concerns, but of course now we need to hear from you. The next steps will identify just the end of comment period and the report wrap up. But importantly, at the end of the presentation, we'll identify the websites where you can see the PowerPoint from tonight's presentation and also the links to make public comments. So do stay on to the end to get that information. Next slide. The DCR's goals for Lower Falls Trail are common to all of our projects: to implement the Charles River Greenway vision, and as I've said before, I know many of you have been working on that for decades, to provide safe and accessible bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, to enhance the experience of DCR's Charles River Reservation. I know it's woven into the fabric of the lives of the residents, and it would be nice to have safe access along the riverbank and invite others to use it as well as preserve natural and cultural resources. As I said, this is often a balancing act, and although the trail layout you'll see tonight has been tested at a detail scale, this is a feasibility study. It is a diagram, not a design yet, but we hope to establish consensus trail layouts that we can use to plan detailed design and construction projects in the future. Next slide. DCR's design consultant is AECOM. Their project has a huge number of technical experts working behind the scenes. Next up is Lisa Decker, a landscape architect and AECOM's project manager, to give us a project overview. Lisa?
I wanted to highlight that Ray Hayhurst from AECOM is here tonight to answer questions about traffic studies and pedestrian access and improvements that we're envisioning for this study. So I just wanted to highlight that Ray is here to answer questions.
Welcome, Ray.
And then the next slide. So the project area, in case you're wondering where it is, it's located west of I-95 and south of I-90. And it is kind of surrounded by partially by the golf course, the Leo J. Martin Golf Course in the north and in the west. And obviously the river defines a lot of the project area. So the landscape is defined by the river and the open spaces in the north, which we've indicated in one box that starts at 2 bridges and continues down to Trestle Bridge. And then the south area, which is a little bit more urban, but interesting and fascinating to be close to the river and to check out Cordingley Dam. So that's how we've broken up the project into the north and the south. Next slide. We've inventoried and provided a site analysis for the project area. And this first map indicates the cultural resources in the project area. It's peppered with historic homes and buildings and a National Register for Historic Places. And one thing to note is that Quinobequin Road is on the National Historic Registry, and that's a DCR-owned roadway. So that's in the lower right of your screen, the bright orange. So there's a lot of interesting things happening in this Lower Falls area. Next slide. We've documented the demographics in the area, and you can see that some of the neighborhoods are like very close to the river, and we want to provide as much access as we can, including providing access for environmental justice areas to get to the river, enjoy it, and really enjoy the open space and access to nature and exercise. Next slide. As I mentioned before, the northern section is encompassed with the golf course. So that really highlights the area, and it gives it kind of a wooded feeling. So the landscape is very different there. And then you can see that as you get closer to the interstate and to Washington Street, the density increases. But there is quite a bit of open space, including DCR's property, along this whole project area. Next slide. The topography is a challenge. You can see the areas in red are the steeper slopes, and we have to, we've worked to provide an alignment that is accessible. So we have to work with accessing bridges in particular in the north, and then in the south section, the bridge along the river at Walnut Street. So we've got some challenges, but it also provides a lot of great opportunities for access to the river, both visual and actually physical access. Next slide. We've also got the challenge of water resources in this area, and we really strive to consider the water resources and the implications of building on or near them. So we've aligned our shared use trail that is sensitive to these environmental issues and concerns. As you can see, the Charles River has a huge impact on the area. Next slide. Utilities is another important aspect of the project, and the main utility that impacts the site is the brick sewer easement that extends from Pine Grove Ave up to the Charles River. But we've evaluated the trail in terms of utilities also. Next slide. This map shows the jurisdiction of the roadways, and you can see that Washington Street, it's a combination of MassDOT, which is in the yellow highlighted with the black outline. So MassDOT owns the roadways from the interstate and part of Washington Street, and then another part, the bridge that crosses the Charles River. The rest are owned by the municipalities, by the town and city. And there is some DCR land. So we realize moving forward that cooperation and coordination is going to be key for developing the shared use trail, especially along Route 16. Next slide. Next slide. We have this is a compilation of this. Oh, okay. On to the alignment. As I mentioned earlier, we've divided the project area into the north and the south. And the north area extends from the two bridges, which is at the railroad bridge that crosses I-95 in the north, and this site area is defined by the trestle bridge in the south and the two bridges in the north. So we've proposed an alignment that extends from the two bridges to the west along the existing railroad right-of-way, and that's the dashed line, the dashed blue line. That's a fairly consistent slope. It's accessible. It's already graded pretty much, so that's a good place for an alignment for reaching the two bridges. At the point where Pine Grove Avenue takes a sharp turn, that's where we transition onto the golf course and provide a accessible shared use trail along the edge of the pine trees. And so this allows for beautiful views to the river, really makes you feel like you're part of the open space. You get to really enjoy being out in this beautiful wooded area. At Concord Street, we propose crossing where there is, in the approximate area of a crossing for the golf cart track right now, and then back onto the golf course amongst the pine trees, wandering, kind of meandering through the pine trees as the grades dictate, so that we disturb the area as little as possible, but we provide an accessible way, safe and accessible. Following that, parallel to Grayson Lane down towards the river, and then following the upper bank of the river to the trestle, connecting to the trestle bridge. And this is where we would need either switchback trails or a ramped boardwalk or deck. We've considered not only recreation, not only transport for biking, commuting, but also recreational biking and hiking and trail use. So the dotted line shows a spur trail that pretty much follows an existing wooded trail through the woods there. And that's a beautiful area. It's where the golf course is very narrow, and you get beautiful views of the river. This trail would be accessible also, but we would have to get up to the elevation at the two bridges via switchback trails or a boardwalk, similar to what we would need to do at the Trestle Bridge. Next slide. Jenny, next slide. we're getting there. Okay. And this is a south section. Oops. Back to the next slide. Yes. The south section, which you can see where it connects to the Trestle Bridge, extends along the existing Charles River, walkway. Oh, no, back to the other one. Back one, yep. And so this is an easy connection that's already existing, and that would be designed so that we provide as much provide the accessible way as much as we can, or we will. And then we meet Washington Street, and Washington Street is, as I said before, owned by the city, the town, MassDOT, and so all of these owners will definitely chime in, I'm sure, on the design of this. Newton has expressed an interest in utilizing the south side in one direction and the north side in the other to meet up with a project that they're working on in the east. So this scheme shows that the main path, the main shared use trail, would be on the north and the south, and then it can connect down to the southern, to Quinobequin Road to continue on the south. So this is a complex area, but it's very vibrant and exciting and interesting, with the Cordingley Dam and the falls and the shops along Washington Street. So this is a kind of a different experience that people will, and destination for people. One of the spurs we're considering is connecting to the existing Cordingley Dam footbridge, and following that along the parking at the office building. There's an existing crosswalk at Walnut Street that would be improved and create a safe environment for crossing there. And in this location, we're considering two spurs. One that would be a proposed footbridge that would bring you lower down to the river and provide views of the, not only of the river, but of the beautiful granite Walnut Street Bridge. Another option is to follow the bridge on a bike trail along the bridge, and then meet up at the intersection and head south along the upper bank of the Charles in the western side of Quinobequin. Next slide. So we've done some traffic studies, and this is a study that shows the various locations where we looked at some improved crosswalks, proposed crosswalks, and how these spurs would meet up with the trail, and how the main trail would work at the intersections. So this is an overview of Washington, Quinobequin, and Route 16. Next slide. This is a aerial of the spurs that I was talking about before, the proposed footbridge, which brings you low to the water, but you feel like you're in a different place, even though you're surrounded by roadways. It's a very beautiful spot, and it would be a great place to be able to really enjoy the river and feel like you're really close to it. And that would be a special spot. Another alternative is to bike along Walnut Street and then meet up with the trail at the intersection of Quinobequin, Walnut, and Washington. Next slide. So this is the crosswalk there's no crosswalk here. This is the cross section at where Cordingley Dam, the pathway, meets Route 16. And you can see that there's quite a bit of real estate to work with. This would be a location for a crosswalk to bring people from the north to the spur that would lead you to the dam and the falls, and then around to the south. Next slide. This is the existing conditions at Walnut Street. The crossing there exists, and it would be controlled if we go ahead with this scheme, but this is an opportunity to get people across Walnut Street and down to the river. Next slide. We're going to be moving from north to south along Quinobequin, but this is the existing condition along Quinobequin. So it again shows that there's quite a bit of real estate, and that there is an existing walkway along the east side. So we have a lot of opportunity here, and the river's on your left. We're going to keep moving south. Next slide. Oops. Okay, this shows the alignments again of the spurs on Walnut Street and then the proposed footbridge. Next slide. This slide shows the opportunity to create a crossing at Quinobequin from the east side of the river, the upper bank, across Quinobequin to the west side of Quinobequin and heading south. So the proposal is to install a high visibility crosswalk and improved, not just improved, but new pedestrian crossing signals to accommodate people safely. Next slide. Then we're headed south on Quinobequin. Again, you can see the existing conditions and the amount of real estate we have to work with, which is which is doable for incorporating a shared use path into Quinobequin. Next slide. And this is the entrance to the underpass. Again, you can see the dimensions will allow for more pedestrian and bicycle use here, and we can create a safe passage here. And the next slide. And then this is the underpass again, which shows that we have the room to incorporate safe shared use paths through here, along with lighting, and that's been one of the requests from bicyclists, that lighting should be incorporated, which makes a lot of sense in this location. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Jenna at this point. Thank you all.
Thank you, Lisa. So next steps, well, tonight is our public outreach meeting, very exciting. And in a moment after our question and answer period, I'll share with you those links I mentioned earlier. The comment period that you can access through those links ends on October 6th, Tuesday, October 6th. So don't wait too long. And then we want that input because the feasibility study report will be issued at the end of the month. Next slide. So now, please do raise your hand, and Jenny will call on you and direct the questions. And let's start with legislators. Are there any legislators who'd like to make a comment before we start on question and answer? Jenny, any hands raised?
Let me unmute myself. I have Rep. Khan. Rep. Khan, you are unmuted.
Wonderful.
Oh, Rep. Khan, I think you have to unmute yourself.
All right, am I unmuted? I don't see myself on the screen, but
You're there.
okay. Well, I got in a little bit late, so I missed the beginning portion. And I think, was that Lower Falls that you did the beginning? Lisa, was that
Yes.
Lower Falls?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm very excited about all of this. I think that I just walked the trail that DCR finished about 2 weeks ago, which is it's the Pony Trust Trail, I think it is. It's wonderful. It's just very exciting. So I'm just going to put it out there. It's just upsetting to me that I live on St. Mary's Street. There's a path behind my house that goes from Riverside right down to Wellesley. And I just think it's very upsetting that we can't do that piece, because that would be terrific. And I know the folks in Wellesley would like it. And we just have a couple of families, I think, on St. Mary's Street and Baker Place that are holding it up. And I just think it's really too bad. So I just want to throw that out there. I don't know whether it makes sense to put that in writing to make that comment. But I don't know if I was on something just a week or so ago and I mentioned it there. So I don't know if any of you were on that.
Yes, absolutely, Rep.
Yeah,
Khan.
we were.
We were, and we will include that comment. If you or an aide want to enter a comment at the website, that's fine too. But we do have a record of comments made at the meeting. So thank you very much for all your support.
Yeah, so I just think it makes a lot of sense, because when I moved into my house, which was 50 years ago, the train was still running and I had no idea. I used to run out and wave to the conductor, and it's a beautiful path. And it's just sad that that can't be part of the whole mix. And I don't know, someone was going to find out about the legal piece, but I haven't heard back from that.
You will. Our legislative affairs group and legal group are on it.
Right. And then I think the other thing I had mentioned that day was some people have asked about having some kind of equipment that you could, sort of do your exercises on, that they do, I think, over at Lions Field. They have something. And so I'd be happy to show a couple of places that I think that would work. So.
Craig Cashman is also aware of that. So busy guy, as are you, Rep. Khan, so he will reach out to you. The reason we didn't put it on the plan is, as I mentioned earlier, this is just a diagram.
Right.
So benches and water bubblers and waysides and signage and those kinds of things will come later.
Right.
With, I think, 29 or however many alternatives proposed in the various plans. We just wanted to get the trail layout settled down, and then we can identify projects to move forward into that kind of detailed design. But that is a wonderful idea.
And also, the one thing I thought would be useful is to get those posts that you put up, where the Pony Trust Trail begins, just next to, on Recreation Road, near the Indigo Hotel down at the bottom. Because I've been trying to explain to people where it is. I posted it on my website. I don't know if anybody checked in with my website, not my website, my Facebook page. If you go to KCON, you can see a nice, beautiful pictures and just a nice walking trail, which I think is fabulous. So are you all with DCR?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I'm Gina Johnson, Deputy Chief of Design and Project Management and Project Manager for the feasibility study. And Lisa Decker is the Project Manager for AECOM. And on your screen are also Jenny Norwood, Director of External Affairs, and Danielle Mellett, a landscape architect who's managing the project with me.
That's great. Well,
And
very
Jenny is with AECOM.
And sorry, you're with, what is AECOM?
AECOM is the engineers
Okay.
who were chosen as our design consultant.
Okay. So just, I don't know if you know this, but so I was a legislator when Deval Patrick put out the accelerated bridge plan, and I worked with Dan Driscoll to actually, so we got these 3 bridges in under that accelerated bridge plan, which was very exciting. And so the first one that got done was the one in Lower Falls from Concord Street in Newton to Wellesley. And then the second one was the Pony Truss. And then the third one is the one that I hope they're going to be doing next year in front of the LaSalle Boathouse. So
yes,
that'll
under design with
Yeah,
Mass DOT. And I think Mass DOT officials, project manager for those projects are also on the call, as is Dan.
Okay.
So when we say that people have been working on this for a long time.
Yes, yes. And I just think it's fabulous. I'm so excited because, like I said, I've been in my location for a long time, and this is very, very exciting that we're moving forward.
Yeah, we're excited too. And that coordination with the Riverside trail mitigation projects with Quinobequin concept design is all part of this. And we had, with great municipal input, we had last minute changes. You know, that coordination is a huge piece of this.
So I just, so you know, if there's anything you need me for, as a legislator, I'm very happy to be helpful in any way. And I recommended to Ted Chapman and the Riverside Greenway folks that it would be nice to have a little kind of opening of the path that just happened and the bridge, which never had a ribbon cutting. So I mentioned this as a possibility that before the weather gets, cold, that maybe there was a way to have a little celebration with the opening of the path and also acknowledging this beautiful bridge that was done. And I know that it's because of COVID, you can't have that many people, but maybe you could have 20 people. And I thought maybe Larry Smith could bring his pontoon boat with a few people, and you could get kayakers, and it could really be a nice little event. So I just threw that out to Ted. So if anybody has any interest, let me know, and I'm happy to work with you to do something.
Sounds like fun. I want to come. I want to be there.
Right, because
and Jenny and Craig Cashman, of course, are the right people to talk to you about that.
Great.
So we will circle back.
Okay, sounds good. I know that Ted was going to bring it up with the Greenway folks, and I just think it's nice to bring attention to all the great work that's been done. It's fantastic. So
couldn't agree more.
You all know how to get a hold of me.
Great. Thank you very much, Ripcon. Okay, Jenny, who's first up?
So I'll do the couple of written questions first. From Andrea Downs, is there any possibility of connecting from the Walnut Street Park to the Quinobequin Park without running along the side of the off-ramp?
Walnut Street to, one of the issues, and Lisa, you can certainly follow up on this, one of the issues is the very steep topography on the bank along Quinobequin. So we really have to give Quinobequin Road a road diet to get a level area for a shared use trail. There could be some combination of suspended deck, but as I think Lisa's existing conditions demonstrated, there's room there to narrow those lanes and install a grade separated shared use trail. So the advantages would be perhaps avoiding the Walnut Street intersection, but it is, I think, too steep to get down with an accessible path to the river, even if you were going to install a bridge at that location. Does that answer Andrea's question? She can circle back, or you can elevate her.
I just wanted to add that the slope is really steep there, and that even at the intersection, where we propose our spur, that would require some switchbacking to get down to a level where people could enter the bridge. So it's a challenge.
Okay, the next question. At the end of the Pony Trust Trail, the tunnel under the railroad tracks is blocked. Are there plans for opening this?
So that is not in the project area. It's kind of a trick question, but that's okay. It's also something that DCR is very interested in achieving as part of our Charles River Greenway vision. So the tunnel project is part of a discussion of trail mitigation projects that DCR is now in conversations with with Mark Development and the City of Newton. That MOA with Mark Development and DCR is under review by DCR Legal. So we are making progress on that, and that is one of the projects under consideration, but that list has not been finalized. And then there are things like budgets and schedules, and it gets real very quickly. But I think we are definitely going to have about 5 projects on the list for trail mitigation at Riverside.
Okay, I'm gonna move over to hand raisers. Ted Chapman, I'm gonna make you allowed to talk, and I think you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much for this great presentation. I know you've been doing a lot of work, and this shared vision is something that the Riverside Greenway Working Group has been working on with 3 years, following up with the trail study that the Lower Falls community did in 2009. In the presentation, Lisa, you did a site analysis with all the different features, and then jumped right to a proposed trail alignment. You know, in a feasibility study, I think one usually weighs alternatives and looks at other options. And I wonder if, I mean, I know it's hard to do that in this kind of presentation, but I'm wondering if they're included in the report, there could be some kind of matrix that where you might add information about the pluses and minuses of different routes, because I don't know what the plans are in terms of implementing any of this, but you know, it could be many years and conditions change, and we may need to reevaluate some of these options when we actually get around to designing the trail. You know, I also in the scope of study, there is it includes publicly owned spaces and roads, and what you show is mostly on DCR land, but you know, there is the Washington Street corridor and the intersection with Route 16 and Quinobequin Road, Walnut Street. But one of the pieces that doesn't seem to have been included is, or I'd really like to understand the thoughts about connecting this to the infrastructure that's going to be built along Route 16, I mean, along Grove Street from Riverside, and the potential of a sort of quick and dirty transportation connection that would go straight from the 2 bridges along the spur behind DeForest Street, and then over to Quinobequin East, which is the sort of connector road on the west side of Route 16 that could get people who are really on transportation goals directly to Quinobequin. Anyway, it feels like in a study like this, we should have, it would be very helpful to have somewhat of an evaluation of the complete set of alternatives.
So, you know, many studies have been done past, Lisa. I'm gonna jump in.
Okay.
Saying hi, Ted. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for all your advocacy in the past. Amazing amount of work's been accomplished with you and your group. So very appreciative of that. Secondly, I just wanted to jump in because, as you know, there's a big DCR team, and all the work we do is reviewed by the agency. And early on, it was decided that this plan, you know, for DCR's coordination with the points upstream and downstream, it should really be on DCR land. And I think our goals were always to have, you know, a safe and accessible path that accessed the Commonwealth's open space. So that was always the goal of this kind of consensus layout. I think it doesn't preclude work by the municipalities or the municipalities in coordination with MassDOT. There are certainly other trails that the town and the city may want to implement. But DCR, legally, we cannot build on property we do not own, certainly without easement or a construction access permit. And typically those are for, the small areas, the 2 feet across the municipal property to get to a backup sidewalk or across a residential property to connect 2 portions of land that DCR owns. So we really wanted to keep this on DCR land because legally we can build on it and we don't have to go through that onerous process of trail easements. So as I said, there are many other paths that the community might want to implement, including to the community center or down Grove Street for a more direct transportation route. But this one we felt, would be really, really pleasant as a green transportation route to Riverside Station, for instance, or be really lovely for recreational users. So does that answer your question?
Yes.
AECom they were game, boy, to do alternatives, but they were directed to just advance this one route because it's on DCR land. And of course, we coordinated with the golf course supervisor and the municipalities, and Route 16 is it's going to be a lot of coordination there.
Right. Well, thank you. And I was also curious about alternative routes within the golf course. I know that there was discussions with the course supervisor about potentially moving some greens and getting paths closer to the river. And so I don't know if any of that data will be in the study, or we're just going to see one.
I think we'll mention it. And I know some of you have heard me say earlier that we do want to coordinate a master plan for Leo J. Martin, looking at the golf course fairway alignments. We definitely installing this trail alignment at a premium. As I said, it's been studied in detail to make certain that it is feasible. And we looked at different alignments through the golf course, but this seems to be the safest. It gets you to the right crossing points. It disturbs the golf play the least amount and is safest for the trail users. But we definitely would redesign 3 holes to make this work, and that's why we want to do a master plan, just to see how many other opportunities there are for recreational use, year-round recreational use for parkland visitors, as well as the ones we're proposing here.
Great. Well, thank you. And the only last thing is you mentioned that the projects related to Riverside, and I know that the city council will.
Oh, Ted, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I just
you said, Ted, you said city council, and then we lost you. Could we?
I just wanted to note that with the DCR's role in terms of the MOU with this Riverside, the city council will be voting on that language next week, and it's been modified. And I think I don't know if you've been in contact with the planning department in the last week or two, but I would encourage you to do that so that the DCR is included in the right way.
Thank you. Yes, we'll make certain that those conversations happen. They are ongoing, as I understand it.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, next hand, Daniel Brody. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a member of the Newton Community Preservation Committee, and I'm also on the board of the Newton Conservators. And I think this is a wonderful plan. I'm really excited about it, but there's one area that I find quite problematic, and that's the stretch from Walnut Street over to where the path would cross under Route 95. That's a miserable stretch of road now to walk or bike along, and you can improve it a little bit, but not that much. So I have a question after this diatribe. The question is, there is currently a town of Wellesley Trail on the west side of the river that goes from Walnut Street quite a ways to the south. And after about, I don't know, 1,000 feet or so going down from Walnut Street, it reaches the point where the aqueduct crosses the river on a very nice little bridge. So the question is, have you considered making the trail alignment, perhaps just what you would call a spur, an alternate route, that would go down there, cross the bridge, and then cross underneath I-95, where the I-95 bridge crosses the Charles.
Lisa, do you want me to start, and then you can
Sure. Sure.
So Daniel, thank you for all your hard work. I see the Newton Conservator's name everywhere on grant applications and sponsors and studies. So thanks to you as well. What we realized when we walked along that trail parallel to Walnut Street that leads to the aqueduct is that there are serious problems with accessibility. The trail's very narrow in many areas. And by the way, let me say, it's not shown as a spur on the plan because we wanted to stay, focused on the connection between two bridges and Quinobequin, but we are going to get that on a list for renovation. It is in dire need of attention. However, when you get to the aqueduct, there are serious accessibility problems. It's very hard to negotiate the change in grade from the top of the finished grade of the aqueduct to the I think at that point, natural trail surface. Also, at that point, you are at the top of the aqueduct, you are, it's difficult to structure a deck on that. And you are at the same level as the highway. So it's not a really pleasant experience to be up there. Maybe for some of you daredevils it is, but I think in terms of having a family up there, it's much more pleasant to get under the highway, under the underpass, and then get to the Washington Street, Quinobequin intersection and down back to the river as soon as you can. I think as I said, the area is noisy. The riverbank on both sides becomes very steep, and aqueduct presents accessibility problems. Lisa, do you want to?
I just wanted to say, when we walked the site the first time, we thought, oh, this might be an option, but then we could see that it was so steep, and that regrading that or even adding like a decked walkway would be really, really hard. And there's also, it's narrow behind those parking lots and office buildings. So there's not a lot of real space to work with. And it just, like Jenna said, it just didn't pan out when we were out there. It just didn't seem like a viable solution. And accessibility wise, it would take a ton of regrading to get that to work.
So these areas have been disturbed. However, our cultural resources people remind us that there are often archaeological resources along the riverbank. And when you would have to manipulate the shoreline to that degree, you're impacting both the habitat and the cultural resources. So that was another reason that we just realized if it were beautiful, and quiet and peaceful and a really pleasant experience, it might be worth the investment, but in the absence of those things, it just didn't seem to be worthwhile.
Okay, next from Bob Persons. Has AECOM received the study of this same area performed for the Solomon Foundation?
We reviewed past studies when we first started on the project. So we've seen studies. I don't know if I've seen the specific one. I think so, but I'd have to look. I have a whole library full of studies from this area, so I'd have to double check. But I'm sure we have looked at that.
I think Herb Nolan is on the call, so he can talk to that as well. They looked at the Quinobequin Road area, and one of their interesting proposals was a culvert underneath the on-ramp for I-95. So there were a whole host of options. You know, our first choice, quite frankly, would be removing that ramp. And when we reached out to MassDOT, you know, they were wonderful. It's a perfect answer. It's part of a much larger study because you're impacting traffic volumes everywhere in the little area when you remove the on or off ramp along Quinobequin. So we got really greedy and asked about removing both on and off ramp. So that is a perfect answer, and maybe as this area gets looked at, they decide those ramps are redundant and one or both can go away, creating another lovely area of the Charles River Reservation. That would be great. But that won't happen for some time, and we wanted a solution that was fairly simple if this segment of the trail were to be constructed first. So that was why we went in this direction. And then Newton actually preferred the crosswalk across the on-ramp. So that was why we made that revision.
Okay, next written from Janet Schreiber. What will be done to protect people using the trail from errant golf balls? Certainly rare, but I understand there was a death several years ago by someone being hit by a golf ball. Thank you. Michael Fox also submitted a similar question.
Okay, well, I'll start again, Lisa, but feel free to pipe up. So we spoke at length with Patrick McDonough, the supervisor of the Leo J. Martin Golf Course, and very knowledgeable in the history of golf and history of that golf course design. He said that the original design has been so altered that further alteration he thinks could be justifiable. Also, we have an opportunity to recondition the golf course to coincide better with the demand, which is for a shorter par, lower par, shorter greens, and you know, shorter play time. So all of these goals can really align, and that's why we need to do a study to redesign the golf course and integrate active recreation. Already it's a cross-country trail and a Nordic ski trail. There are cart paths there. And so, yeah, we'd be very mindful of the design to avoid exactly that kind of tragic accident. I'm so sorry to hear that happened. But we have confidence that it can be done.
Okay, I'm going to bounce back to hand raisers. Alicia Bowman had a comment and also has her hand raised. Alicia, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. So I'm Alicia Bowman, and I'm one of the city councilors in Newton and a longtime advocate for trails and walking, and used to actually be part of the Riverside Greenway project. And this is unbelievably exciting to see this. And so I just said, thank you very much for your passion on this. A few things. Will part of the feasibility studies be suggested phasing? So how the pieces might get done in, over time. And then have you identified any quick fixes like the lighting in the tunnel for Quinobequin? That seems like if that piece could be done, it is a problem because especially if you're in the bright sunlight and then you immediately hit this, you don't realize unless you hit this dark tunnel and you're sort of disoriented as a bicyclist coming through there. So, and maybe even restriping the Quinobequin Road lanes. I was just there today, 14 feet is a really wide lane. So maybe even just some quick restriping of some of that might help. So those are my big questions, but I am very excited, and yeah, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you. So as regards the suggested phasing, yes, that is part of the final report. We wanted the proposed layout to settle down before we thought about that. Cost estimate is also involved, and Ray and Lisa have been working hard on that. But again, we wanted the plan to settle to incorporate your comments before we finalize that. And no, I'm sorry to say, what we call at DCR early action items is not a part of the scope. Because as a feasibility study, you know, we just feel the need to kind of catch our breath, take a look at funding for these projects. But I think what you suggest is just great stuff. Why wouldn't we? I think we'd have to coordinate with our sister agency, MassDOT, because the underpass is, of course, in their I-95 right of way. But that's a great suggestion. And maybe, you know, paint is relatively cheap. So maybe we could coordinate with them to a road diet just to start to, you know, make passage through there a little safer. Lisa?
Yeah, all of those things. I think they're all great ideas. And as you could see from those cross sections, and since you ride your bike through there, Alicia, there's plenty of room for a road diet. So I think that, you know, depending on how DCR moves forward, but, and phasing is definitely part of what we'll be putting together for the final study. And we can break everything out by cost. As you can see from the plans, it's fairly, you know, there's chunks that you can take that seem doable. So we'll associate costs with linear feet of new shared use path, shared use trail.
Okay, next to allow to talk, Herb Nolan. Herb, you're on.
Hello, great to be at this point in this process, and kudos to the DCR for taking on what we've all thought to be one of the most difficult connections in the region. I was very happy to see this thing move forward right now. I do feel like it's sort of part of the momentum coming out of the Riverside work and advocacy that's been going on for 3 years now, as Ted said. A couple of comments though. I was happy to see the 2 trails that you proposed. One was sort of a paved shared use trail, and the other was a woodland walk down along the river. As advocates have been thinking about the whole Riverside area, they've been thinking very much about 2 systems, one for walking and one for biking and a shared use. I take issue with one of your design moves, and that is this. The shared use path along the railroad right away makes a great deal of sense to me as a planner. It's straight, it's accessible, and it's in the trees. It's lovely, and your walking trail goes off and down along the river, which seems very appropriate to that environment. You can walk through these mature woods. But then if you are actually wanting to bike from, let's say, from the Wellesley area towards the train station or further on, you would not be apt to take this circuitous path through the mature pines along the golf course. If your whole
Herb?
That would be a much more natural alignment, and I think a lot of cyclists would split off and go straight up St. Mary Street if their intent was to bike along here and get where they need to go. The pathway going through the woods, those are some of the most mature pine woods along the Charles River, and I can't imagine you could cite that path, avoid the golf courses, and not have a huge impact on those mature stands of pine. I think that path is a better walking trail, much narrower. You could save many more trees, and I think you could be safer and set back from the golf course. the golf course is going to go on. It's going to go under into a master planning process, and that's fantastic. And I think out of the end of that, you will have a much better sense of where pathways can fit and where they don't belong. So that's the one thing I would say. If there's a phasing approach to this, I would encourage you to do the first piece along the rail trail and get through that master planning process and think seriously about where those trails belong and whether they should be 10-foot wide paved pathways or walking pathways. Back down to the Quinobequin area, I think you probably have the Kittleson plan. We didn't realize this was going forward. And when Jenna said this is happening, we were surprised and we gladly handed her a very quick study, but it was a very good study. It had a matrix, it had alternatives, what Ted was talking about. It weighted them. And I think your alternative is pretty close to the one that I think may have, in my view, was the most practical and solved the problem. But I think there's some blind curves, a few nuances that you ought to really dig into and make sure you get that crossing just in the right place. I'm with you. I think it's, we did talk to the MassDOT. It's going to be years before they consider pulling up ramps. That's DCR land. It's covered with highway approach ramps. But there's definitely a way you could do that and consolidate ramps. It just won't happen for the next 20 years. So let's get this connection to happen. And so I'm very excited to see you working on that piece. But I'm, continue to have reservations about bringing wide paved pathways through mature pine woods, and that's my one concern. And I'll leave it at that.
Her great suggestions. As I said earlier, this is a diagram for coordination purposes. We're not certain what's going to go first. Will Riverside go? It's kind of exciting. Will Riverside go first? Will Quinobequin go first? Will Route 16 go first? Will the MassDOT improvement projects go first? So we wanted, just as you suggested, a really practical, reasonable investment that could enable safe and accessible trail users to get through the less pleasant areas, or at least make the least pleasant areas more delightful and less terrifying. Without things like a culvert, which would be incredibly expensive, disruptive to the highway traffic, and be very expensive. So
I agree. The culvert was I think not really feasible when you start to dig into it. I think you discover it would be very, very difficult. Just one last comment. I totally agree with RepCon. We have a reason to celebrate. It's the Pony Trust Trail. If you haven't gone out there, folks, go out there. It's a spectacular experience. And then there's the bridge, which just is it's an emblem of what this agency does. They build bridges sometimes to nowhere because they know at some point in the future, these connections will happen. And it's an act of faith sometimes. So kudos to Dan Driscoll, I know, who has worked on that in the past, and to others. And we're going to make these bridges to nowhere connect to somewhere. And that's what the Riverside Working Group has been working on. And I'm very proud of those guys. They've done some great work.
as are we all.
Okay, next we have James Jample. Go ahead, James.
Thanks so much for taking my questions. I have a couple, if you'll bear with me, as I'm relatively new to this process. So, looking at the connection of the two bridges to Riverside, it would seem to me that that's kind of the linchpin of the whole thing. That in that part, really there is no connection over those bridges to Riverside at all, really, right now. So, how should we think about like when that could be open, and would that kind of have to be the top priority? Because without that, this is a trail to nowhere on the north end. So that would be my first question, and please go ahead with that one.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Mark Development has suggested several trail mitigation projects in the Riverside area. And one of them is two bridges. They are proposing that they would pay for the design of 2 bridges, as well as an access ramp up to the threshold of the recreation road side. And, you know, these are wonderful projects. These recognize DCR's vision. These are bridges that Dan Driscoll identified a long time ago as critical to connectivity for the Charles River Greenway. So we are working toward implementing that. Funding is not identified for the construction, the renovation and trail construction over those 2 bridges and the area in between, which is just beautiful, by the way. We're excited about it, but it's very much in the planning stages. Does that answer your question, James? We agree. It's right now. It's a path to nowhere.
Yes. Okay. So that's in the purview of Mark development and the city's negotiation. It really doesn't have anything to do with DCR.
Well, it's actually, there's a no. It is owned by MassDOT, and DCR would take ownership through easement or other means as part of the Charles River Greenway. So we do have an interest in it, and we are negotiating with Mark Development on a memorandum of agreement.
Okay, so second brief question is if you could explain the nature of the 2 different paths once you get off the 2 Bridges Trail. What's the difference between the 2? Why are there 2? Would one be prioritized over another, et cetera?
The one that was indicated with the blue dash, that's along the railroad right of way, and that would be more of the commuter section where people just want to get where they're going. And the spur, the dotted line, is more in line with the existing woodland path that winds around through that end of the golf course, and that end is very narrow, and there's a hole there. I forget which hole it is, but the golf course superintendent was saying that that they have a lot of trouble keeping a green there, and so that would be a natural place to have more of a real trail that winds through the woods. You get views of the river, and it would be more of a recreational walking trail, and then connect up to the first bridge, the western bridge. So they would vary in character and in use. One would be more for commuters and one more for recreation.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the third question, and then I'll get off here, is like, I see the proposal for a new footbridge down near Walnut Street. And, you know, and that would be a very beautiful spot, as you say. I guess, but my reaction to that would be is if I'm walking this trail and I've already gone over the Cordingley Dam Bridge, I mean, that is absolutely spectacular spot. That is just awesome in its power, and it's hidden, and you go, wow, there's a lot of water here. You're like, ah, this is fantastic. And so you get the full fury of the river and the full sort of that of the river. And, you know, if I were looking to decrease the cost of the project, after doing that, yes, it might be nice to see the Walnut Street Bridge from the side, but it's a little bit of an anticlimax. So I'm just wondering, you know, as you look at the plans, do you guys like sort of feel the same way? Is that very expensive to do that footbridge versus, you know, making it better on Walnut Street and just getting over the river again there?
So you actually, I'm gonna spill the beans, Lisa. Unfortunately, you saw the wrong PowerPoint. There was one that was advanced. You saw an earlier iteration, and we did show the Walnut Street bridge as an option if the proposed footbridge does not get built or gets, we call it, value engineered out of the project. We understand it's an expensive proposition, but we also like to make big plans. We think you know, that intersection is at Quinobequin Route 16 and Walnut is one of the most complex and unpleasant in the region, and it would be nice if we could get a portion of the trail for recreational users away from that, and so get off the roadway, get off the Walnut Street Bridge, and simply cross Walnut Street. So that was the intent there.
And one of the things that's kind of misleading about the plan is when you look at that area in plan view, is the river is actually very beautiful right there. It's not just viewing the Walnut Street Bridge, but it's the view of the river to the south. And it's that was surprising because you're in the midst of all this kind of spaghetti of roadway, but that's a very beautiful spot. It contrasts to the dam because it's slow moving and it's calm, but it's a completely different kind of an experience. So I think we all kind of fell in love with it when we were out there looking at the site.
James, you can let us know now or in comments to the web link, but we do understand that Wellesley is doing a redesign of Walnut Street, and we certainly would want to include safe bike and pedestrian accommodations across the bridge as an option. So yeah, your reasoned approach may win the day.
Thank you so much. Great presentation.
Okay, next up, Jessica Mink. Jessica, you're on.
There, unmuted?
Are you there?
Yeah, I am. I'm trying to unmute. Just a second. I hit the unmute button and it didn't do anything.
No, you're good. We can.
You're
good.
good.
Oh, you hear me? Oh, okay. Yeah, so I just really am happy to see this. I've been following this piece of the river for many, many, many years. Every 5 years, I do a loop of the city on bike paths, partly inspired by the fact that I've been working on the Neponset Trail on the other end of the city with the DCR for 30 years. So next year is my fifth of my 5-year bike ride, so for my 70 miles. And I guess this won't be done, but I'm looking forward to it for my 75th. Are there plans for Quinobequin south of Echo Bridge, or where do you end exactly on this? Is it just going underneath? I guess I'm not sure how far it goes. I assume it does go. It sounds like it goes all the way to Echo Bridge into the aqueduct, but what happens after that?
It is confusing because we have two projects going on simultaneously. One is Lisa's project, the Lower Falls Shared Use Trail Feasibility Study. And as she documented on the plans, it goes from the two bridges abutment all the way down to the upstream side of the I-95 underpass.
Right.
And then the Quinobequin Road and Trail Improvements Project concept design goes from that point, the upstream side of the I-95 underpass, all the way to Ellis Street.
Okay.
Crosswalk where we want to get a trail connection and across Route 9 to Echo Bridge and Hemlock Gorge. So it's all the pieces, as I said, are coming together. We don't know what will be constructed first. There's a lot of planning and design still to do, as well as funding, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I know about this.
Two studies, two DCR studies going on concurrently.
Okay, well, I'm glad they're moving. And
for people who are interested in Quinobequin, the date hasn't quite settled down. We think it will be in early October, and you should expect to see an announcement within the next day or two.
Yeah, I'm watching for it.
Okay, great.
It's just really great that this is happening finally, and I've used the little pieces that are there over the years, and I'm hoping that the negotiations for the opening of the underpass under the railroad tracks that's been closed can proceed and in some way, because that's extremely important to this project, to connecting along the river. There's just no other way to do that without getting on really, really busy streets. So you can get all the way up to that point from this science museum, or actually from the park, or from Charlestown. You can get all the way there to that point without having to deal with super busy streets. So getting that done so you don't have to ride on the streets, that's the thing we have to cross busy streets on the other route where the DCR could improve some of the crossings. But that part would be really important for this whole connectivity thing, because it is, we do have this beautiful network, and this is going to be a big part of it. So I'm grateful.
Hearing from people like you that actually use that whole greenway is just so.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it really is amazing what you can do. And if you do it every 5 years, you really see that over that time scale, things do improve, and they're very distinctive. So this year, like, I think when I do it next year, I'll be able to ride through Cambridge in ways that I couldn't before. So it's going to be exciting to see it all come together. Hopefully I'll still be alive, but
Oh, stop.
lots of it. At the rate it's going, I mean, I've been working on this stuff for 40 years. So on the Charles for 40 years, starting with the extension upstream from the VU Bridge that was done in 1981. So
Tremendous.
So thanks very much.
Thanks to you too.
Okay, bye.
Okay, jumping over to written again. As a follow-up to the very first question from Andrea, yes, there is a park just to the south on the Wellesley side that is lower. This was talking about connecting two parks. Yes, you would probably have to have a boardwalk or a deck under 128, but then you'd also avoid the rampant poison ivy and the speeding traffic, which unless you would design a raised or protected trail is the issue along the off-ramp.
Yeah, Lisa has studied it, and we feel that it is really feasible to get a shared use trail on the southwest side of Quinobequin, and vegetation management is a part of every one of our projects. So the trail projects, this is to Herb Nolan's earlier point, that the trail projects really do try to preserve our natural resources and restore our natural resources wherever possible. So while poison ivy is a native plant and is great habitat for other species, that's something that we could renovate to be a greater diversity of species.
Okay, next. Any thought to making a short section of Walnut Street a one-way street from Route 16 to River Street? Then you could do a grade separated multi-use path down Walnut Street and along DCR parkland adjacent to River Street to Route 16. This would mostly avoid Route 16 and provide a more family-friendly path alternative.
I would say, you know, Lisa or Ray, if you want to address that, that would be great. Or if there's somebody from Wellesley who might want to weigh in.
It looks like Ray is not on the call right now. We know that there's a project proposed for. Oh, you are. Okay, why don't you go ahead then, Ray? If you
sure, yeah. We did look at an on-street facility on Walnut Street. I guess there is a grade issue, so it would make, you know, the feasibility of a on-street trail more difficult to construct. There's also a lot of driveways as well on Walnut Street.
Okay, from Jeff Gallus, is there any prospect for connecting the northern end of the trail to Clearwater Road?
So that's something that people had requested us to look at specifically, but that triangular parcel of land that extends from two bridges to close to Clearwater is actually City of Newton land. So again, it's a little complicated because it's MassDOT right of way. There is a gas line easement, and it is City of Newton land. It is not DCR land. So as I said earlier, DCR decided as an agency that you know, we really want to renovate, restore natural resources, create accessibility into the reservation, gain access to the river, and you know, going in the away from the river on property that doesn't belong to us just didn't make sense for DCR at this time, because it's pretty heavy lift to get built what was proposed. And so going onto municipal land just didn't make sense.
Okay, I'm going to call on Bob Schreiber. Bob?
Hi, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay, Jennifer?
Yes.
Yes. In broad terms, how will pedestrians and bicyclists be protected at the crossings and also along Washington Street, Walnut Street, and Quinobequin Road? I'm asking because drivers going along these roadways are generally going fast, and a significant percentage of them are not paying attention to crosswalks and stoplights. Many of them are either just coming off Route 128 or heading to it, and thus driving as if on a superhighway without pedestrians or bicyclists. So I'll go back on mute. Thank you.
Lisa or Ray, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can answer that. So yeah, your point is well taken, and we do realize that there are a lot of vehicles coming off the highways that are traveling at speeds that are entering the community, and intersecting with the trails and where we want speeds to be lower. So I think a key point or key part of our study is looking at ways we can reduce the travel lanes to be narrower, to reduce vehicle speeds so that the crossings are safer for trail users. Our study looks at a variety of traffic control and rectangular rapid flash beacons to improve the visibility of the crosswalks. And we will also look at, we're also looking at the lighting to improve the visibility of trail users. So long story short, there are a variety of design strategies that we will employ to keep speeds low and keep trail users safe.
Okay, I think this is the last question right now. George Kirby, go ahead, George.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for taking my question. I was involved with the first phase of the rail trail construction from Concord Street across the bridge to Wellesley. And I'd like to echo Herb Nolan's comment about bicyclists wanting to take a direct route and would prefer something like St. Mary Street over to the golf course to get to the two bridges. So I wanted to ask a question. What is the timing for these trail proposals that you've laid out until they could get built? And perhaps that timing would dovetail to whenever the permissions to build along the actual rail trail right-of-way might be obtainable. So if that's the case, perhaps you could align to St. Mary Street as a temporary alternative until such permissions are available. And in that way, you would have the least changes to your design should that become available on the rail trail itself. Thank you.
So I'm hearing a lot of interest in the direct route, and it's encouraging if people have an interest in green transportation. Thank you for helping public health and decreasing carbon emissions. That's great. So, the rail trail, that right of way is in a legal process, and when I queried our legal department, DCR's legal department, about the status, they basically said that there's just nothing to report. It moves at a glacial speed. So with that in mind, we thought, bringing people closer to the river is a good thing. So let's not hold up the trail planning process. Let's move forward. And yeah, I think what I'm hearing is that there is an interest for people to possibly leave the DCR trail in the vicinity of St. Mary's. So Lisa and Ray, Danielle, it sounds like we should be looking at a crosswalk in that location, some kind of trailhead and crosswalk at that location. George, do you want to comment on that design addition?
I think that could be helpful. Again, St. Mary's is a more direct path for someone doing commuting or accessing Riverside. It's not as good as a dedicated separated trail on the original right-of-way. I'm just suggesting that it's an interim way to go until such time as the legal issues resolve. And in that case, you could switch back to the actual right-of-way and join the golf course at a similar place when that happens. Yeah, I mean, I think the pedestrian path, as Herb said, would be ideal along the river, but for a wide paved or stone dust bike path that would be more suitable for transportation more directly, that would be a good thought. And who knows, since the funding is not necessarily available for all these trails you're outlining, it might take a similar time as resolving the legal issues. Who knows? I certainly wouldn't close off that option. And the other thing I wanted to ask about, since the walking trail is certainly going to meander around a bit, have you guys thought about good signage to direct people? Because in some places where trails along the river exit and come back a little ways later, it's sometimes confusing unless you already know the trail. Thank you very much for your efforts. I appreciate the ongoing work and also Dan Driscoll's vision to get this to happen. Thanks.
We've been, oh, I was just going to say that we always use signage the best we can for wayfinding and other cues, but signage is included in the feasibility study estimate, including even the granite markers with the egrets that you see around this area. So there's a variety of different signage types that we would implement here.
Yes, absolutely. And as I said earlier, this is kind of a diagram. We want to test a potential layout for planning purposes. So we're not locating signage, but certainly, as Lisa mentioned, it's included in the estimate because it's going to be critical. Interpretive signage, of course, as well. I will say too that DCR Trails and Greenways Group is working on prototypes for standard signage along trails. So we'll be implementing that, we hope, in short order. Other questions?
I think we're done and right on time. I will put up the last slide. Give me a second, I'll share my screen. This last slide tells you all you folks have attended, thank you, first of all. Secondly, if you have additional comments or have other folks who may want to, couldn't join us tonight, but may want to see the presentation, it will be posted to the DCR website tomorrow. We'll send out an email to all to let you know. You can enter comments there to the plan and also see the presentation.
So I'm not seeing the slide. Are others?
I put it up right now. There we go.
Great, thank you.
Let me get the full screen. There we go. This link too will be in what is shared tomorrow. And you'll have until October 6th to suggest additional public comments. All the comments you've made here today will be included in the list of public comments. We're gonna have a chat. Hold on. Okay, that didn't work. Stop sharing. And okay, that's it. Thank you everybody for coming. Jenny, do you want to close?
I just want to thank everybody too. It seems like a good percentage of the participants are involved in trail advocacy, trail design, or are very serious trail users. So what a great group to share their insights. Thank you very much. And stay tuned for the release of the final study, which is just a small milestone in all the wonderful work we have to do to realize this plan. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.